Our speaker this morning is Stefanie Lee. Stefanie is a four-year boarding student from Hong Kong. She's a co-president of the SGA, vice president of the Student Philanthropy Council, and a member of the debate and squash teams. She's a proud roommate of Christy Arnold. Stefanie?
How many legs does a spider have? All eyes were on me, and I was completely mute. I opened my mouth, yet no sound came out. Arguably the most important moment in my life up to that point, and I couldn't even muster a word to save myself. I was only 5 years old, but it was a life-defining moment in the eyes of many. Certainly in the eyes of my interviewer. This was my elementary school interview. In Hong Kong, there is a standard interview process many kindergartners have to go through in hopes of being admitted into a prestigious elementary school. For this particular interview, I was put in a room of around 10 or so prospective students, and one interviewer would randomly select students to answer simple questions like what color a ladybug was or what the proper term for a cow baby was. The room of enthusiastic, bright-eyed 5-year-olds fixed their eyes on me, anticipating an answer that resonated with what they were thinking, that a spider has 8 legs. My interviewer, fierce-looking, arched brows, pursed lips, stared back at me expectantly as well. Honestly, they probably felt like the Earth had done an entire rotation around the sun with the excessive amount of time I was taking to think about a question as easy and straightforward as this. The answer to the question was 8. I knew it. But then, could it be 6? I started thinking, or maybe 10. I wasn't sure. I didn't know a single person in that room, but there was no way I was letting myself blurt an answer that even had the slightest possibility of being wrong. The crippling shame that would come after was too much to handle. So instead, I found another way. I sat there, fixed my gaze on the blackboard in front of me, making sure I avoided all possible eye contact with my interviewer, and didn't say a word. Predictably, I didn't get into that elementary school. How did it go? My mom asked me enthusiastically after the interview. I responded pretty apathetically. I didn't say anything. She asked me how many legs a spider had, but I thought I was going to get it wrong, so I just sat there and didn't answer. I could tell she tried to hide her disappointment when she replied, "It's not about getting the answer right." Sure, that helps, but what they really want to see is a little kid who isn't afraid to speak their mind. Don't overthink it next time and just go for it. These words she said to me will forever be etched in my mind. I can still clearly recall how it happened. I was sitting in the back of her car, munching on some apple slices while she drove us home after my disastrous interview. Maybe she was right. I mean, the other kids who were in the room were throwing answers here and there, and I'm sure at some point someone even blurted that French fries were made out of carrots, and no one laughed or made snide comments about it. They were confident enough to say something like that, and I couldn't even muster up the courage to say an answer I was almost positive was correct. When I was 8 years old, my parents enrolled me in a quote-unquote debate class outside of school. To be fair, it really didn't constitute as debate. We sat there, declared whether we were for or against a certain topic, gave a sentence or two about why we chose the side we did, and that was pretty much it. Really, it was nothing more than 20 seconds of sharing our own opinions, which could never be wrong. The room was lively and buzzing with keen 8-year-olds dying to share their 2 cents with the rest of the room. The topic of the day was whether school uniforms should be enforced, which you could probably imagine generated quite a bit of eagerness in the class, where most of us despised the fact that we had to go to school every day wearing stiff and just objectively ugly uniforms. We went in a circle, and it was pretty much a rapid-fire session. Toby went, and then Ashley did, and then it was my turn. I opened my mouth, and again, not a word came out. I knew what I wanted to say. I was against wearing school uniforms because I wanted to express myself and feel comfortable in my outfit. Plain and simple. Not a hint of complication in that sentence. Talk about déjà vu. The entire class was staring at me, again, and the teacher, Miss Robin, was prompting me to speak up. I looked down at my lap, fidgeted my clammy fingers, and bit my lip. The dead silence in the room lasted a good 20 seconds. Eventually, Miss Robin gave up and said, "All right, we'll come back to you later when you've collected your thoughts." I started fixating on my problems somewhat obsessively. What was wrong with me? Why was I so consumed by this fear of speaking to people outside of my immediate family and close friends? Furthermore, why was I so consumed by the fear of being wrong? The fear of expressing my thoughts and being judged? Why did I lack the basic, essential confidence that all my peers seemed to be full of? Because funnily enough, most of the time I had the thoughts and answers to the prompts already in my head. I just couldn't express them verbally. I was relatively boisterous and loud around my close friends and family, but put a new face in front of me, and immediately I went from 100% to 0%. Quite a few years went by where I paled in comparison next to my group of peers who always carried themselves so strongly and securely. My fear of speaking up consumed me, and although seemingly harmless, it hindered a lot of my growth and development in many aspects. I was scared and nervous to speak to new people, which made meeting new friends a daunting task and pretty much out of the question. Worst of all, I was also scared to speak in class, which set back my learning and left me confused about many concepts since I wouldn't be willing to ask questions to clarify my confusion. The bottom line was this: I was worried about how I came across to others and how they would perceive me, so I kept to myself a lot without realizing the harm it was doing to me. I knew I needed to eventually do something about this fear. The question was, how? I would consider making a step towards changing this awful fear, but the intrusive thoughts would come rushing in. What if I said something stupid or mock-worthy? Of course, my parents had given me countless pieces of advice, but they were all simple to understand, yet seemingly impossible to execute. It might seem ironic that this is a story I'm choosing to tell today, given the fact that I'm up here giving this talk right now, or maybe the fact that public speaking is a pretty routine part of my life now. It's probably hard to believe that I once had such a crippling fear of speaking. I mean, one of my favorite things to do now is speak. I even do it in my sleep sometimes. Just ask my roommate, Christy. But the truth is, from as early as I can remember all the way until the end of third grade, confidence and believing in myself was probably the biggest struggle of all. I was going to a local Hong Kong school with a bar set extremely high. My peers answered questions in class loudly and proudly, and they got the answers right every time. I, on the other hand, would find myself sitting there with an answer in my head, only for the teacher to say something entirely opposite. The turning point towards this fear of mine came in a pretty peculiar way. It actually came in the form of a bribe from my mom. Every year in my elementary school, we would have big cumulative exams at the end of June, right before we broke for the summer. My mom had promised me that if I got a 90% of my math exam, which she knew was my worst subject, she would buy me one of those stuffed toy pencil cases that was wildly trendy in my entire school. All of my classmates had one, and it seemed like the best thing a 9-year-old could ever get. You could play with it in class, role play with your stuffed toy pencil case, and furthermore, what child would not want a stuffed toy disguised in the form of something functional to get them through the long school days? I yearned for a giraffe stuffed toy pencil case. So I decided I would do whatever I needed to get it. There was just one slight roadblock. I was probably averaging a 70% in my math class, and there were a truckload of concepts I couldn't even remember the names of, let alone implement in carefully worded math problems. My third grade math teacher was a scary woman. Honestly, even if I didn't have a fear of speaking up, I'd be terrified to ask her anything about math. But again, the giraffe pencil case was almost within reach. I wanted it really badly. So I started doing the unthinkable. I started raising my hand in class, clarifying concepts I didn't know, and engaging with the material we were learning. Taking the first step was challenging. I remember glancing around the class to see if there were any noticeable reactions from my classmates upon raising my hand for the first time in that class. And then heaving an internal sigh of relief once I realized nobody really cared that I just raised my hand. In fact, most people's heads were buried in their exercise books while they racked their brains for an answer to math problems. Right now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but taking leaps of faith like this was what got me through my fear of speaking up. After the first step was taken, everything came easier. Raising my hand to ask questions or contribute to discussions didn't seem nearly as daunting because the more I did it, the more habitual it became, which translated to something more and more natural for me. So I guess the moral of the story is this. If you see yourself having a fear like mine, find someone who can bribe you to overcome it. That was a joke, but I did want to wrap up with 2 lessons that helped me conquer this fear. The first one, trust yourself. Basically, a slightly less cliche way of saying believe in yourself. My spider anecdote tells it all. My parents believed in me. So did my kindergarten teachers, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. The list goes on. But that didn't change a thing. I wasn't able to cross that bridge despite the many people rooting for me from behind. My message today isn't to discount the unconditional support we are on the receiving end of, but rather that all that support and faith others have in you mean nothing if you have none in yourself. Find a way to believe in yourself. Find a way to believe that you can achieve that something too. Not that this is all achieving your goals takes, but it sure takes you a step closer because confidence comes hand in hand with it. Believe in yourself and trust your judgment. The doubt you instill in yourself is probably the biggest foe you'll face. So try your best to set that aside and count on yourself. Because in my experience, oftentimes that self-doubt also leads to self-deprecation, which viciously traps us in the same cycle over and over again. We doubt ourselves, self-deprecate, and then wonder why we don't do well. And then we doubt ourselves again because we didn't do well. As Dr. Rhodes once told our math class last year, don't self-deprecate because other people will do it for you. The second moral to my story comes hand in hand with my first piece of advice. Genuinely do things for yourself. Each one of us has opinions about everything and they are constantly forming. It never stops. I'm positive that as I'm up here right now telling my story, you're probably forming opinions of me, how I speak, how my storytelling is going, how much you like my talk, and so on. And that's okay. But remember that the opinions others have of you don't mean much, so long as you are staying true to yourself. If you're content with what you're doing, you'll find yourself dismissing the judgment you receive from other people because you understand that it is so trivial that spending time obsessing over it is simply a waste. Of course, this is much easier said than done, because ultimately, it is human and natural to care about our impressions on other people. And that's not going to stop. But what I learned over the years is not letting that perception consume you. Let yourself breathe. Speak your mind. Do the hobby you wanted to undertake. Realize that most of how you think others are perceiving you is probably just in your head. To this day, despite being much livelier and louder, which I'm sure some teachers can attest to, how others think of me still bothers me. It is the reason I sometimes choose not to wear certain outfits, not to make certain inside jokes, or not to show my full range of emotions. But I'm still working towards it, and I think if you all experience the same issue, you can as well. I don't think there will ever come a time for me when I absolutely disregard what anyone thinks about me. But at least for now, I can comfortably speak my mind and be my best and true self, which I have myself and also Hill to thank for. These 2 lessons have increasingly become pillars of how I live my life now. Without these epiphanies, I would probably not be up here right now giving this talk, or maybe even here at Hill for that matter. Now, I can finally be at peace knowing that if anyone ever happens to ask me how many legs a spider has, I can confidently, undoubtedly, and unequivocally answer 8. Thank you.